Alright, what's going on, Planeswalkers? This is Keith with Less Magic, More Gathering. We got a deck tech for you today. First off, I want to say I know that I promised a Haunt of Hightower deck. I did promise that, but I have to take that promise back. For right now, that deck is just not quite where I want it to be. So we're going to continue to test, continue to work on it, and hopefully I can give you a good product here before too long. I just don't want to give you a deck that's not worth using. And if you're on Arena, you've got to use wild cards to try and put this deck together, and I don't want to give you something that's not worth spending your wild cards on. So for today, you're going to get our version, specifically my version of the Gates deck. Everybody's all abuzz about the Gates deck. This is a super budget deck. In paper, you're looking somewhere between 20 and 25 bucks, and in Arena, your only rares are going to be your Expansion and Explosion and Deafening Clarion. So everything else is uncommon or common, but let's jump right into it. We're just going to work our way up the mana curve here. First off, since we're in a best of one format pretty frequently on Arena, I did include 2 copies of Gaia's Blessing. This is going to prevent us from getting milled, and a lot of times that 2-drop being able to draw a card is going to help keep us on curve, and it's not bad to have. So put in 2 copies of Gaia's Blessing. We put in 2 because if you happen to draw one, you can always use it to put the other one back in your library so that it protects you against that mill opponent. So we're running 2 of those. And another card that's just kind of for our protection is Clear the Mind. And there's potential in this deck to draw ourselves out. So this 3-drop here is going to make it so that if we get to the situation where we've drawn too many cards, we can shuffle our graveyard and our library back together and just start fresh. So those 3 cards right there are just really for protection's sake. Now on to the gate stuff. We're running 3 copies of District Guide. This is going to allow us in the early game to go find because we're doing 4 colors here, so it's going to allow us to go get the colors that we need to make sure that we can stay on curve properly. It also obviously searches up a gate for us, which is very important in this deck. Next, we've got Gatebreaker Ram. This dude is an all-star. I promise you, once you start playing with this deck, this dude gets huge. He's always got Vigilance and Trample, so typically you're getting a 4 or 5-drop Vigilance and Trample for 3 mana. Really good value, and he puts in work. That's freaking probably the best card in the deck. It's tied. Anyway, moving right along. Guild Summit. We're running 3 copies of Guild Summit, and this is where that card draw is going to come into play. If we get to plopping down lands every turn and drawing multiple cards, we can really draw a lot of cards with this deck. That's why we put the Clear the Mind in there, just 1 single copy. So Guild Summit's pretty cool. Every time a gate comes into play, you get to draw a card. And when you cast it, you can pay the 3 mana, and then when it comes into play, you can tap additional gates and draw more cards that way too. So it's a really good way to fill up your hand in the late game if you need to, and in the early game it just assures that as the game goes on, you're going to get to draw more cards. So really good card advantage off of that one. We got 4 copies of Gates Ablaze. Gates Ablaze is super, super helpful in this deck because our main creatures are Gatebreaker Ram, Gatekeeper Gargoyle, and Gate Colossus. They're all pretty big, so typically Gates Ablaze isn't going to kill your creatures. It's just going to wipe your opponent's board. So really handy, especially with the creatures that are in this particular deck. Now, we're also, for that same effect, we're running Deafening Clarion. This is usually going to be used in both the deal 3 damage to each creature and give us lifelink. It's really good against burn. It's really good against any kind of aggro because your creatures are huge usually. So being able to give them lifelink and hopefully be able to wipe or, shrink your opponent's board is really helpful. So we run this with both modes activated most of the time. We got 2 copies of Ixalan's Binding. I don't know why, but I've been playing zombies a lot. I don't know if that's just something new people are doing, or if it's trying to make a comeback with the old cards. I don't know. But one card that was really driving me crazy was, it's not Open the Graves. It's, maybe it is. It's the one it's the enchantment that makes it so that whenever a non-token creature dies, you get a 2/2 zombie. That was really hurting me. So I put in Ixalan's Binding. It'll handle things like your Wilderness Reclamation, which is a big problem right now for a lot of people, especially just playing on Arena and free play. People are trying to play the Nexus deck. So being able to Ixalan's Binding that Wilderness Reclamation is good. It's also going to work against your Planeswalkers. Even something simple like a Reassembling Skeleton. Being able to Ixalan's Binding that so they can't cast it multiple times and keep returning it and all this other stuff. It's really good. So really helpful card, and being able to hit our draws with things like Guild Summit helps out a lot. Being able to get to it, and then you just hold on to it until there's a threat that you can't deal with the AOE type removal spells. So, and then Circuitous Route. Circuitous Route is a 4-drop that lets you search for 2 basic lands and or gates. So any combination of 2 land cards, lands or gates. You put them onto the battlefield tapped and shuffle your library. When you've got something like Guild Summit out, that's going to give you extra card draw. With our creatures in the deck, it's going to make them bigger. With something like the Gate Colossus, those coming into play will let you put that back on top of your library. So Circuitous Route, pretty good card, and it helps us ramp up a lot. Next, this is one that I don't usually see in people's decks, but it's really good. I mean, it's a little bit expensive, but like I said, we've got the ramp that we can get there pretty easily. So Gatekeeper Gargoyle is a 6-drop 3/3 flyer, but it enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter for each gate you control. And once you see the land base, you're going to understand you're never going to have any problem getting your gates. So that's usually going to come into play with a lot of counters on it. And it just becomes a big threat that your opponents have to deal with, or they're going to have a serious problem on their hands. Next is Gate Colossus. I mentioned it a minute ago, but just the details on this one. It costs 1 less to cast for each gate you control, so a lot of times it's just free, or 1, 2, 3, 4 mana. You can get it out pretty early for 4 or 5 mana, and having an 8/8 is super beneficial, right? And then it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and if it's in your graveyard and a gate enters the battlefield under your control, you can put it on top of your library. A cool interaction with Gate Colossus and Guild Summit is you can stack these triggers so that a gate enters, you put the Gate Colossus on your library, and then you draw it using the Guild Summit, and then you can sometimes just cast it for free. So that's a really good interaction between the cards. Pretty cool. Next, we've got Expansion and Explosion. Expansion is going to let us copy things like the Deafening Clarion if we don't happen to have a Gates Ablaze in our hand. It'll also let us copy things like Circuitous Route or the Gaia's Blaze. I mean, obviously you can copy any of these spells because they're all 4 mana or less. So you can copy any of your spells, but you can also use that against your opponent. So if they're trying to kill something of yours, you can use it to also destroy something of theirs. And then the explosion side of it, once we've ramped into all this land, it just gives us a good mana sink to be able to draw a bunch of cards. I was just testing this deck before I did this video, and the opponent had the black and white enchantment where you can pay and exile a creature, and then if you've got 3 creatures exiled, it flips and you can put those onto the battlefield under your control. And he had 2 creatures, and I happened to draw into an expansion explosion. So I cast the explosion side to draw 5 cards, and my 5th card I drew was the Ixalan's Binding I needed to get rid of that thing before it became a problem. So just sometimes you just need to draw some cards. That's the last spell in the deck. Now, onto the lands. We're running 1 single mountain, we're running 3 forests, and the rest are gates. We've got 4 Izzet Guild Gates, 4 Gruul Guild Gates, 4 Boros Guild Gates, 4 Selesnya Guild Gates, and 4 Simic Guild Gates. And it sometimes hurts to have all those coming in tapped, but typically I think I've only really had 1 game where being a turn behind put me in a situation where I wasn't going to be able to come back from that. And I was playing against a Golgari sapperling build, and they managed to build up a bunch of sapperlings pretty quick before I was able to get to it. If I would have gotten a Gates Ablaze, I would have been fine. But I just wasn't able to get to that stuff, so they ended up beating me, long story short. So there are a few situations where it would be nice to have some untapped lands, but I think being able to consistently hit your gates is more important, and it typically ends up being more beneficial for you in the long run. Now, if you're going to run a sideboard, one thing that I would recommend putting in there, let me see, Angel Gate. I don't have any. The Archway Angel would be a good one, definitely in the sideboard. Some people are running this main board. It's a 6-drop 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life for each gate you control. So that is sometimes, being able to gain that extra life is going to be helpful. But I've found that being able to give these big creatures that we've got in the deck lifelink is typically enough. So I guess maybe in the control matchup, you might want to have something in your sideboard for that. But aggro, I haven't really had much of a problem because we're able to wipe the board pretty consistently. We've got plenty of those board wipes. Against burn, being able to get our big creatures out there that are bigger than their burn ability, and then being able to give them lifelink typically kept me in the matches. Control, it sometimes kind of struggles, but we can typically get enough stuff out there that they feel like they have to deal with, that we can absorb a lot of that. And being able to return Gate Colossus from the graveyard to the library is really handy in those situations. And Expansion's kind of an all-star in that situation too. So it's got a pretty decent matchup against most decks. And with how budgeted it is, I mean, it's really competitive, especially when compared to its cost. So I would definitely try this one out. I think you're going to like it. Give it a few rounds to figure out how to play everything and when to do it to make it so that you benefit the most. But it's a pretty good deck. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you try it out. If you do, let me know what you think. We'll see you next time. Deuces!